We need to nationalize 70% of the US economy. The United States is in crisis. Right now, it's nearly impossible to look at any aspect of American life with optimism. Healthcare, infrastructure, public services, consumer prices, everyone can agree that things are just getting worse. Groceries are at an all-time high, doors are falling off planes mid-flight, people are paying for burritos with payment plans. This is not how things are supposed to be. Outside of weapons contractors and the stock portfolios of the wealthiest 10% of Americans, nearly every facet of our society is in decay. This decline isn't random, nor can it just be chalked up to inflation. There's no mystery as to what is causing this, and these problems are not inevitable. The erosion of our quality of life is directly tied to privatization and unchecked corporatism. This is the logical next step of late-stage capitalism and its perverse incentives. At this point, there's no excuse to not make the connection to the cause anymore. The only people still defending the system are those clinging to an ideological knee-jerk belief in capitalism, even as it is actively ruining their lives. We can all agree that society is at a major low. Even though conservatives, liberals, and leftists might disagree on the cause, the effects are clear. We are so far gone that at this point, you don't even need to view this in the lens of socialism versus capitalism. This is first and foremost common sense. 65% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. Homelessness is exploding, all the while private equity and billionaires make massive profits. Any rational person can see how unsustainable and destructive corporate dominance has become. We can all agree things like school, police, and roads are far better off being public goods. The truth is undeniable. At the very least, a mixed economic model with the heavy majority of critical industries under public control is a vastly superior system compared to the dystopia we are plunging into headfirst. Now let's get to it. These are the industries that should be nationalized. Healthcare, including hospitals, pharmaceuticals, and insurance. Infrastructure and transportation, including all railways, airlines, and public transit. Utilities, including all electricity, water, and sanitation. Energy, including oil, gas, renewables, and grid management. Telecommunications and internet, which would break up phone and internet monopolies. Education and research, which would include a lot of the existing subsidized research that is patented by corporations. Defense, which would end the military-industrial complex and in turn end constant warmongering and incompetence of our military. Prison systems, which would end the privatization of incarceration and rehabilitation. Large amounts of housing. This would ensure that at the very least, everyone in America has access to a house, providing sufficient high-quality public housing to meet demand. And perhaps most importantly, nationalized banking, which would end the Wall Street dominance in our society. Think nationalizing AT&T, Verizon, Boeing, Lockheed Martin, UPS, JP Morgan, ExxonMobil, your electricity provider, to name a few, and any other major players in the industries mentioned. These critical industries serve society much better as societal goods and not profit-making opportunities. However, some industries make much more sense, at least in the short term, to be privately run. These industries include hospitality and food, like restaurants, bars, and hotels, entertainment and sports, like film studios, music, and sports leagues, creative arts and crafts, like publishing, design, and handmade goods, local services, like salons, gyms, repair shops, tutoring, tourism, like travel agencies and tour guides, various attractions, retail, including clothing, department, and convenience stores, niche manufacturing, like breweries, fashion stores, and custom trades, consumer tech, like software, hardware, and apps, however, high government oversight when reaching the level of Meta or Google, and small to medium scale agriculture and real estate. These private industries would be non-essential things where market competition is good, but large industries that have massive effects on people's daily lives must have the oversight, efficiency, regulations, and most importantly, incentive of decisions that make sense for society over profit. Public industries prioritize function over profit, and when profits are made, they can be recycled into infrastructure, research, and development instead of being hoarded as private wealth. A good way to think of this is like this. Most street-level businesses like flower shops, fruit stands, bars, restaurants, clothing stores should remain private. Meanwhile, the larger institutions towering above us, like hospitals, banks, insurance companies, and telecom companies, should primarily be public. I want people to compete over who's going to make me the best damn pizza, not who's going to extract the most money from me before seeing my doctor. Overall, the economy should be mixed with a large edge towards the public sector, having something like 60 to 75% of the economy public and the remaining 25 to 40% private. The highest amounts of prosperity in American history, although very exclusionary, was during the 1950s to the 1970s, which was the time of the highest government involvement. Nationalization is democratization. Right now, billionaires who are utterly unaccountable to the public make decisions not for the good of society, but in service of a sociopathic, endless pursuit of profit and growth. By reclaiming these private industries and placing them under government control, we return them to the people, ensuring that they are managed in the public interest and held democratically accountable. A Northwestern University study analyzing thousands of policy decisions found that the preferences of the bottom 90% of earners have no measurable influence on policy outcomes. In turn, America is an oligarchy. The system is rigged in favor of the wealthy. Nationalization breaks their stranglehold and puts power back where it belongs. In the imagination of capitalism, you have a variety of firms competing over a market, all putting forth different products or services. You will naturally be getting the fairest price for your product because in this theorized free market, if someone can do it better and cheaper, then they will beat out the competition. This might have existed in some capacity during the 1950s to 70s in the United States when there was much more regulation, trade unions, and higher taxes. But it is clear that this is not how society currently functions. Something much worse has happened, called enshittification, where companies give you the worst possible product at the highest possible price. Capitalism in theory is pro-competition and gives the consumer the best possible price, but in practice, it hates competition and always creates monopolies through larger firms buying out or putting smaller firms out of business. Just take it from the billionaires themselves.
I have a single idée fixe that I'm completely obsessed with on the business side, which is that if you're starting a company, if you're the founder, entrepreneur starting a company, you always want to aim for monopoly, and you want to always avoid competition. And so, hence, competition is for losers, something we'll be talking about today.
We do not live in a competitive market by any means. This is the logical conclusion to capitalist incentives of infinite growth, and we have reached the endpoint. This is why you may have heard the term late stage or end stage capitalism. This is what defined America during the Gilded Age in the 1800s, with American robber barons being the richest people in history and dominating the entire country with their monopolies. We are seeing the exact same thing today. Every major industry and service you interact with in your daily life is likely owned by a massive monopoly and has been supercharged with AI algorithms not to help you, but to extract as much money out of you as possible. This is why you're struggling. Not the government, DEI, or immigrants. These corporations have a boot on your neck. One of the biggest lies you've been told is that this cost of living crisis is due to inflation, which makes it seem like it's out of the corporation's hands to raise prices. But in reality, it's greedflation, where they are raising prices simply because they can get away with it, and they have this toxic profit incentive above all else. Greedflation accounts for 53 cents of every dollar of inflation in the past 6 months. So over half of the price increases you've seen are just made up because companies know that they can get away with stealing more from you, not due to any genuine increase in any of their costs. Let's look at some examples of how privatization has ruined large industries. Boeing used to be the pride of America. Run by engineers, it made the best planes in the world. There was a famous saying from people who worked in the company: "If it ain't Boeing, I ain't going." Now it is the complete opposite. Engineers who work in the company warn that they won't even fly on the planes. The company has been completely taken over by finance executives who treat it as a financial instrument, prioritizing stock prices over building planes. This has resulted in hundreds of deaths and planes falling out of the sky. ExxonMobil is a private fossil fuel company subsidized by American taxpayers to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars every year. Fossil fuel companies receive $20 billion in direct subsidies and $649 billion in indirect subsidies annually from taxpayers like you. Yet despite footing the bill, the average American sees no benefit from these handouts. In countries like Norway and the Gulf states, the profits from these lucrative energy companies are reinvested into society, funding free healthcare, education, and other public goods. In America, those profits do nothing but make a small elite richer, even as the government subsidizes them. Now look at the American military-industrial complex. Private weapon contractors charge massive markups for everything because they face no competition. This leads to fraud, waste, and abuse at an unbelievable scale. Just look at a couple examples. The Pentagon pays $75 for screws that cost 57 cents in a hardware store, $285 for a screwdriver, $7,622 for a copy maker, $469 for a wrench, $214 for a flashlight, $437 for a tape measure, $2,228 for a monkey wrench, $748 for duckbill pliers, $74,165 for an aluminum ladder, and $659 for an ashtray, all paid with your tax dollars. Not only do they overpay for basic items, but the profit motive also incentivizes private contractors to drag out weapons development and keep production small scale, the exact opposite of what's needed in a conflict. Countries with nationalized defense simply say we need X amount of shells and they make it happen. Meanwhile, the Pentagon failed its 7th straight audit, unable to account for $824 billion, meaning they literally don't know where the money is going. I think we need to completely demilitarize our disastrous foreign policy and drastically cut the military budget, though that's another discussion. But whatever remains should obviously be nationalized. Finally, have your electricity bills gone up? Private-owned utilities supply 70% of U.S. electricity and have raised residential rates over the past 3 years at a rate of 49% higher than inflation. Meanwhile, publicly owned utilities increased their rates 44% less than inflation. It's a perfect example of how you're getting ripped off for no reason. These are just some of the major examples of industries primed for nationalization, but you can guarantee that the bill you just got, the one that you can barely afford, or that recent price hike comes from some monopoly or corporation that has consolidated its niche. These entities, now often powered by AI, operate under a single motivation: maximum profit extraction. It's the same for prisons, education, and every industry in the US today. Again, this doesn't mean every business in the country needs to be run by the government. Your local restaurants, grocery stores, and small businesses could still thrive, leaving room for entrepreneurship. People would still be able to create businesses that they believe in and are passionate about without issue. Unless your company starts to truly have a large impact on society and have thousands of employees or more, nothing would change. Society-shaping industries should be run by the government, not by profit-driven entities willing to cut corners at our expense. The reason you haven't heard this argument is because almost all media is owned or heavily influenced by the billionaire class. It's pretty obvious why a billionaire isn't going to allow an argument to take away a large amount of their money. Their incentive is perfectly clear. But when you actually listen to these arguments on why their private ownership is better for society, they're incredibly flimsy and don't hold up to the most basic scrutiny.
At a Morgan Stanley conference, Musk argued the government should privatize anything that can be privatized, including the Postal Service and Amtrak.
Basically, something's got to have some chance of going bankrupt, or there's not a good feedback loop for improvement.
To take away what we call the 7 deadly sins, state-owned industries, their ability to export deflation, all of that.
Let's deconstruct these arguments. The 4 biggest arguments are comparisons to the Soviet Union, public ownership is corrupt, public ownership is inefficient, and public ownership lacks innovation. Let's address the first critique of comparisons to the Soviet Union and the problems that specific experiment faced. Many Americans are unaware of the large positive changes in life expectancy, literacy, housing, and infrastructure that happened as a result of the Soviet Union. But regardless, the very real and large failures and challenges that they faced are used as the primary example of what a government-led alternative could look like. This represents a logical fallacy of a false equivalence, suggesting that by rejecting our current corporatist model, it would inevitably lead us to the exact same conclusion. This flawed argument completely ignores 3 crucial realities. First, that we could adapt what actually worked from various systems. Second, America's economic, technological, and geopolitical starting point is incredibly different from the Soviet Union's. And third, they will never try to address the more contemporary and relevant examples of successful state-owned or majority-owned enterprises around the world. Many countries in the European Union, like France, the Netherlands, Czech Republic, and Sweden, to name a few, have large parts of their economies such as healthcare and railways run by the government. The Gulf states' government management of their energy and aviation sectors is used to massively benefit their people. Norway has leveraged its state-led energy sector to fund one of the world's largest sovereign wealth funds, massively benefiting their society. Japan's heavy government involvement in many aspects of its economy has ensured a very high baseline quality of life and economic stability. South Korea's strategic public investment in infrastructure, finance, and energy has helped it transition from a developing country to a global industrial power. All of these examples show how modern governments using a state-led model with long-term planning and high levels of public ownership create much better results for their entire societies than our current model. This is by no means an endorsement of every single one of those countries' policies or systems. They differ from each other greatly, and they still have many flaws. It's simply highlighting the specific fact that they took much more consideration to the needs of the public good in forms of distributing wealth created by their societies. And no one can credibly say that any of those countries are anything like the Soviet Union. The most successful countries on earth have the most important parts of their economies state-run and owned. Frequent examples of capitalist success stories like that of Korea or Japan are not because of free markets, but the exact opposite in heavy state intervention, investment, and planning of industries. Becoming an industrial powerhouse doesn't come from the free market. It is a result of long-term planning from a central government. Think about how successful America was mobilized during World War II. For a true picture of free markets, deregulation, and privatization in action, look no further than 1990s Russia. After the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, the privatization of public industries created a new oligarch class that seized national assets, creating unprecedented inequality. This was all done following the exact playbook given to them by the West on their ideal capitalist restructuring of their society. The consequences were catastrophic. Russia suffered across every measurable standard of living. Male life expectancy plummeted from 63 years in 1990 to just 57 by 1994. Organized crime surged. Women's status in society fell drastically, going from pillars of society to being subject to sex trafficking in mass. Deaths from alcohol poisoning, suicide, heart disease, and violent crime reached levels comparable to wartime casualties. By 1993, 30 to 50% of Russians lived in poverty. Industrial output halved, and Russia's GDP dropped by 40%, only recovering to 1990 levels 17 years later in 2007. This was capitalism's freedom for Russia. Now, 2025 America is following the exact same playbook. Our radically deregulated economy lets corporations strip the country for parts, like thieves tearing copper wiring from the walls for quick cash as the house is burning. The parallels are undeniable in the crash of living standards, declining life expectancy, and evaporating household wealth. We shouldn't be looking at Russia for the Soviet Union comparisons, but for the 1990s oligarchy comparisons. The Soviet comparison is a distraction from viable public options around the world that actually work, and a lack of imagination to the unique possibilities available with America's current position. The next myth peddled to push for privatization is the idea that publicly run industries are supposedly more corrupt than privately owned ones. This claims that if industries are run by the government, then a select few bureaucrats will be rich from hoarding the wealth from the government. This is ironic because it's the exact same system we currently have under capitalism. This exactly describes our system, but much worse. Except the people hoarding the wealth are not public officials, but CEOs, and they answer to no one and have zero forms of accountability for public good. Absolutely no level of public system bribery and corruption in a public government agency could even come close to a fraction of the current bribery, corruption, and wealth hoarding we currently have in today's billionaire class. When an industry is publicly operated, like transportation, energy, or mail services, there are multiple layers of accountability built in to check corruption. Within each government department, there are internal accountants responsible for tracking the budget. On top of that, government auditors from broader agencies oversee financial activity and would be alerted to any major discrepancies. Performance reports, promotion records, and publicly accessible salary databases all contribute to greater transparency. Because these records are public, it's much easier for anyone to spot corruption compared to private companies where everything is kept hidden. Ultimately, if officials fail in their duties, they can be removed from office because they're accountable to the public. There will always be mistakes and bad actors in any system. There will always be people in positions of power and people who make mistakes. The only variable you can control for is the amount of accountability people have. And in our current system, you have zero power or accountability over Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk, or most people who have an enormous impact on your life. Your opinion and public opinion are completely irrelevant. We already have government agencies successfully performing essential duties, like the EPA making sure water and air aren't polluted. Despite being under attack, the FAA, which employs air traffic controllers, makes sure planes don't crash into one another. The USDA makes sure our food isn't contaminated or poisoned. The FBI catches serial killers, and NASA took us to the moon. These people's salaries are publicly available, and it's a preposterous assertion to suggest that these places are flush with cash and they're blowing them on exorbitant salaries or corruption. The right wing wants you to believe that if these industries were state-run, then they would immediately see corruption to that of underdeveloped countries across the world. Much stronger legal systems, oversight, and institutions that wouldn't allow this to happen, and the real comparisons would be to other advanced economies' successful state-owned enterprises. By right-wing logic, Scandinavian and EU state-owned industries like healthcare and trains should be some of the most corrupt places on Earth. But this obviously is not the case. These Nordic countries have much higher levels of state intervention and have some of the lowest corruption in the world. If you want to find a toxic, awful, corrupt system, look no further than America's for-profit healthcare system or this current Trump administration. Famous drug addict and man-child Elon Musk tried to tackle the massive corruption and overspending in the government with Doge and literally didn't find anything even remotely close to the $2 trillion he promised to cut. Everything he claimed to have cut wasn't even existing fraud and waste in the government. He simply canceled future contracts to useful government services. That's not waste or fraud. It's just an excuse to gut or privatize public services and make your life worse. Think about it. If there was actual rampant fraud going on, why haven't you heard of a single trial or criminal charge going on against corrupted officials stealing massive amounts of money? The answer is because it doesn't exist. A whistleblower from Doge joined the agency because he genuinely believed that there was rampant fraud and abuse going on and wanted to help. After working in the agency, he was shocked at how efficient the government was actually running and said that federal waste and fraud were virtually non-existent. Musk just ended up firing a bunch of people working on things like childhood cancer research, life-saving cure trials going on for years, the IRS going after rich people avoiding taxes, the Department for Veterans Affairs, the Consumer Protection Agency returning money to people being scammed, and Social Security keeping half of our elderly population out of poverty. All the while not even touching the Pentagon, which is literally the largest source of waste, fraud, and abuse in the history of the planet. Great job, Elon. Another major myth is that government systems are inherently inefficient. Depending on what country you're watching this from, you might already be thinking about a public service you really love that works very well, like public transportation in a European country or healthcare in Canada. Or you might be thinking about the problems of a public service like your frustrations with the NHS in England, or the hollowed out remnants of public services in the US like the post office. Whether a public service is efficient and high quality or not is entirely dependent on how much funding it receives and what stage of privatization it's in. Modern governments often adopt neoliberal austerity measures that slash the budgets of public services like healthcare and transportation. Clinics are shut down, hiring freezes go into effect, wages stagnate, and wait times to see a doctor increase. Naturally, people become frustrated with the drop in quality from what was once well-funded, widely appreciated services. Billionaires and corporations then seize on this discontent, They funnel money into ad campaigns attacking these services and make generous contributions to the re-election campaigns of sympathetic officials. Using both the real decline in quality caused by the budget cuts and their influence over public perception, they help pave the way for these services to be sold off to private companies. Once private companies take over, they do what they're designed to do: maximize profit above all else. And they achieve this through cost-cutting and price hikes. That means laying off workers, understaffing critical services, reducing offerings, slashing job benefits, and lowering wages. When a service like a hospital or a rail network is publicly run, its core mission is to fulfill its intended function, whether that's transporting people from point A to point B or helping the sick get well. But when privatized, a dominant profit motive is introduced. This motivation will inherently conflict with the mission of the service. That's because improving service quality requires investment, and investment eats into profit. Whatever issues you have with the NHS or any other public healthcare, train system, or service is not because of them being publicly run intrinsically. It is almost certainly because the service is underfunded. And if it is any other reason, then it can certainly be resolved within a government system that regulates and oversees it. What are you actually doing when you privatize a service? The train conductor, the maintenance men, janitors, doctors, nurses, workers, they all still have to work there and do the same exact job. The only thing you're changing is the purpose of the service from providing a service for society's sake to a toxic profit-making entity that sees societal good as an irrelevant factor. Do you know what would actually solve issues with doctor wait times and the train being awful? Training and hiring more doctors, incentivizing work with good benefits, and investing in the actual trains and stations, not selling them off to a corporation. Once again, there are countless examples around the world of public state-owned enterprises running not just efficiently, but outcompeting for-profit services. The Fortune 500 is an annual list published by Fortune magazine that ranks the 500 largest global corporations by total revenue. It is a well-known measure of corporate success and is often used as an indicator of the health and strength of an economy. China has completely caught up to the US and even surpassed it in 2023, having 142 companies to America's 136. Of those 142 Chinese companies, 85 were directly state-owned, with the remaining having major percentages owned by the government and receiving funding from state-owned banks. If you look at the top 10 of the Fortune 500, positions 3, 4, 5, and 6 are held by Saudi Arabia and Chinese state-owned enterprises. The rest of the top 10 positions are held by American corporations. As an American, I can give less of a fuck about Walmart and Amazon being the most profitable companies in the world. It has no benefit on my life whatsoever, and I don't care about how much wealth is able to be funneled to Jeff Bezos and the Walton family. If I were Saudi Arabian or Chinese and saw the Chinese National Grid Company at number 3 or Saudi Arabia National Fund at 4, I at least get the benefit of knowing that these state-owned companies succeeding has direct material impact on my life, as their profits are recycled into the country in the form of more investment into developing the power grid, healthcare, schools, and country, and not some guy's fourth yacht. China's public rail system has 45,000 kilometers of high-speed rail connecting the country from big cities down to the smallest villages. Trains between large cities run dozens of times per day, with 40 trains per day between Shanghai and Beijing alone. Those cities are 1,318 kilometers apart, with high-speed trains covering the distance in just 4.5 hours. The nearly identical distance between New York and Chicago takes Amtrak around 19 to 20 hours. Their rail network employs 1.78 million people, carries millions of passengers daily, and is net profitable with profits increasing year after year. What could be a more complex industry than that? With an operation that massive being undertaken by the government and knocking it out of the park in literally every measurable aspect, it completely disproves any notion of public inefficiency. There's nothing inherently unique about transportation that makes it the only sector suitable for public management. The same model of success could and should be applied to other critical industries, and it already is in China. The next excuse billionaires will push to justify their stranglehold on industries that should be public goods is that state-owned enterprises supposedly can't innovate. This argument collapses under the slightest scrutiny. On October 4th, 1957, the Soviet Union launched Sputnik, the world's first artificial satellite. This took the US completely by surprise as they had no active satellite or space program, and in response to Sputnik, the US government established NASA on July 29, 1958. This coined the phrase a Sputnik moment, which has come to symbolize any event that jolts a nation or person into recognizing it's falling behind on a critical area, prompting urgent action and innovation. This is a prime example that disproves the idea that the state cannot innovate. It wasn't a profit incentive that launched us into the space age. It was a national motivation and a collective desire for space exploration and defense. The massive scientific achievements of that era, including the moon landing, were driven by public ambition, not market forces. The success of NASA in bringing us to the moon was the result of publicly funded minds working toward an incredible goal. It was the state mobilized by public will that utilized our collective resources and energy in pursuit of a shared human aspiration. And that goal was achieved by any means necessary, with no regard for profit margins or return on investment. NASA had far more planned for the years immediately following the moon landing, but once that singular goal was accomplished, budget cuts began to chip away at its ambitions. Year after year, funding has been reduced and more aspects of the space program have been handed over to private companies. This shift redirected the core motivation from exploring the stars for the sake of humanity to generating shareholder value and securing lucrative government contracts for figures like Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk just to send celebrities on vanity space trips.
1, 2, 3, taking up space!
Elon Musk has lived off government welfare, having received $38 billion and on average $6 million a day of your money, all the while producing shitty rockets that blow up all the time. So he's not even accountable to doing the job well.
Oh my God.
Do you really think NASA scientists are making discoveries and breakthroughs every day purely because they're getting a paycheck? Or is it more likely that they're driven by a fascination with space and a deep passion for exploration? Do you think medical researchers and doctors work tirelessly to find cures for diseases because of a profit motive? Or is it because they've lost a loved one to that disease or because it feels deeply meaningful to help others? Assuming that the only way to motivate people is through selfish, shallow material gain paints a grim and nihilistic picture of humanity. Yes, people absolutely want to earn a good salary. That's a universal and perfectly reasonable desire. But when people make arguments about innovation being the driving motivation under capitalism, they're referring to the potential for infinite money accumulation through patenting an idea or technology. In practice, this rarely happens. According to IRS and Census Bureau data, roughly 85 to 90% of Americans earn most of their income through active labor wages, salaries, and tips. The last 10% of people are those who are not living fully off wages by inheriting their money, living off the stock market, or other people's salaries as a landlord. The vast majority of people would be perfectly content with a good salary, one that allows them to live a dignified life, enjoy comforts, and have the freedom to innovate or do meaningful work. Most people aren't driven by a sociopathic need to accumulate wealth at any cost. Unfortunately, the most cutthroat people who will pursue money by any means necessary are the ones who currently rise to the top of our society. That's the problem. Instead of rewarding those tendencies, we should be building a system that raises the baseline quality of life for all of society and guaranteed access to basics like housing, healthcare, and salary. And the truth is, those ruthless people are almost never the ones actually making the breakthroughs. The real innovation comes from the people working under them. Or, in many cases, they're simply coasting off a single idea they had 30 years ago, or just holding massive stock investments and not contributing anything to society. The scientists and engineers who make these breakthroughs almost never own the patents themselves. They're usually salaried employees, and the rights to their discoveries go to the corporations or governments they work for. So the idea that their motivation stems from owning a patent or getting rich off of it doesn't even make sense. They're clearly driven by something else. But we don't even need to consider the theoretical reasons why this doesn't make sense. There are plenty of clear modern-day examples. Remember those Chinese state-owned national companies that ran things like phone service, transportation, and energy? They are now more technologically advanced and out-innovating America in almost every single way. China's major phone telecommunication services are provided by state-owned enterprises like China Mobile, China Telecom, and China Unicom. Their country already has 5G even reaching the most remote villages, and 6G is expected to roll out by 2030. People don't realize just how transformative that technology will be for society. 6G is set to operate in terahertz frequency bands, potentially delivering data speeds up to 1 terabyte per second. It will offer 1 millisecond latency, enabling truly instantaneous response times. That's like downloading hundreds of 4K movies or an entire hard drive in under a second. Meanwhile, in America, we can't even imagine that kind of capability. 5G hasn't even fully been rolled out, and our telecom providers operate in monopolies with no real incentive to innovate. And even if that level of technology did arrive, it would be gatekept behind massive paywalls just like every other major innovation in our current system. Public services don't have shareholders to answer to or the pressure to generate massive profits. So the price you pay reflects the actual cost of the service, not the highest price companies can get away with, like in America. As a result, Americans end up paying far more than what these services actually cost. How do you think AT&T had a net income of $12.3 billion in 2024? It's by ripping you off, and not with better service or innovation either. Is your service really any better than it was 10 years ago? I personally pay $80 a month for the lowest plan possible, and it's painfully slow because carriers intentionally throttle coverage and prioritize customers who pay more. Meanwhile, in China, the average monthly expenditure for mobile phone service is only $5, which is well below the global average of $11. Not only is the service much cheaper and faster, but Chinese providers also adapt the newest and most innovative technologies far more quickly than American firms. What we need are telecom companies that operate like public services. Imagine AT&T Free, America Mobile, and Verizon-owned, where the focus is on providing quality service and reinvesting profits into innovation, not simply maximizing shareholder value. When it comes to high-speed rail, I can't even compare it to the US because we don't have any. Meanwhile, China just unveiled a new type of maglev train that will literally levitate above the tracks at high speeds. Over the next decade, they plan to develop a network of maglev trains capable of reaching speeds up to 600 miles per hour, literally faster than air travel for many routes. Can you imagine America's private-led model accomplishing anything close to that in the next 10 years? Of course not. These are exactly the kinds of advancements we could be enjoying. The world is also on the brink of a climate crisis, and China's state-led incentives have enabled heavy investment to transform their grid with cleaner, more efficient energy, single-handedly making renewable technology affordable and realistic worldwide. Meanwhile, America hasn't expanded its grid since 2005 and has doubled down on toxic, inefficient fossil fuels driven by profit motives that are literally destroying the planet. Public research benefits from simplified funding and centralized coordination for effective planning and problem solving. In contrast, the US scatters expertise across competing private firms, scrambling for billionaire and venture capitalist funding, dividing knowledge and talent. These firms are primarily driven to acquire patents to extract rents and not to advocate clean energy or public good. Public investments in the West often come through the form of the dreaded public-private partnership that hands private control over technologies developed with public funds. The public-driven model allows for long-term commitment without the pressure for immediate returns. It allows centralized coordination, reliable funding, unified talent and resource allocation, and policy-driven innovation goals. These advantages have delivered clear results. While much of the technology of the future remains theoretical in the US, China has brought many breakthroughs to life, including bringing a thorium reactor online in October 2024, and by making significant advances ahead of the West in fusion reactor technology. Regardless of your views on China, across almost every industry, Chinese state-owned enterprises consistently outcompete US for-profit models in utilities, industrial sectors, and energy. These facts underscore the urgent need to honestly assess our own systems rather than ignore reality. Assumptions about private firms being more innovative are obsolete or completely wrong. Recently, innovation in America has become completely stagnant and investment into research and development has completely crashed. In America, what is the first thing companies spend their profit on? Stock buybacks. Stock buybacks are where companies use profits to simply buy back more shares of their own company to inflate their stock prices. In 2024 alone, S&P 500 companies repurchased a record $942.5 billion in shares, marking an 18.5% increase from the previous year. That is quite literally $1 trillion of pure greed and waste that is not going into research and development and certainly not into the hands of workers who made that wealth. And in America, if that money isn't going into stock buybacks, it's going into CEO bonuses. It used to be that your boss made 30 times the base employee's pay. Now, CEO compensation has soared 1,085% since 1978, compared to a 24% rise for the typical worker. This is money that otherwise could have been going into innovation or the paychecks of the workers who produce the value. On top of the innovation myth, the reality is that some industries should never be treated like a typical business or approached with the same chaotic, destabilizing breakthrough mentality popularized by Silicon Valley. These sectors are public goods that impact billions of people's lives. While I fully support competition between private firms in the sectors mentioned at the start of the video, truly essential public goods should never be privatized and treated like a business. If you're enjoying the video so far, please take a second to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Thanks. Now, despite all the evidence to the errors in our system, there's a common argument I see online defending capitalism by claiming that many of the problems aren't actually caused by capitalism itself, but an idea of crony capitalism. This is a weak and misguided argument. The fundamental incentive of capitalism is profit above all else. Naturally, this drives behavior that harms society in the relentless pursuit of ever-increasing profit. There is no space for moral decision-making because once a capitalist system dominates, it essentially puts a gun to the head of all competitors. If a company chooses a principled approach, paying workers better wages or avoiding fossil fuels, it will simply be outcompeted by those that cut corners and act in the most ruthless, cutthroat way possible. In other words, capitalism is a system that rewards the most ruthless, anti-human actors and companies. It's foolish to see these outcomes as mere faults or aberrations of an otherwise well-functioning system. Instead, they are the fully rational and inevitable consequences of capitalism's profit-driven incentives. Think of it like this. The capitalist drive for profit above all else is like using a bloodthirsty animal to achieve your goals in society. No matter what cage you build to contain it, it's always trying to escape. And when it breaks free, it rampages, triggering global financial crisis. and contributing to preventable suffering from hunger, disease, and war. The idea of crony capitalism assumes that this inherently untamable beast can somehow be controlled or tamed. The obvious solution is to stop trying to bargain with the beast to give you what you want and try to accept its anti-human nature, but to use a human-based approach to build society. Lastly, going hand in hand with nationalizing fundamental utilities and fundamental sectors, we should nationalize the American banking system. Banks are the primary financial institution in a country and are responsible for lending money, facilitating payments through cards and transfers, directing funds to investments, supporting liquidity, meaning having cash on hand, and creating confidence in the system. In America, we put these very important financial services in the hands of massive privately owned and publicly traded banks. Their goal is to generate profit for shareholders. These include names you have definitely heard of, like JP Morgan Chase, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, Citigroup, Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, Capital One, and many more. Having the financial institutions and funding in society decided by profit motivation creates obvious conflicts of interest with decisions that should be made for societal good. In our current economic system, it is just accepted that we will be subjected to catastrophic economic recessions every 6 to 10 years. This is often as a direct result of the fuckery these financial institutions do in the pursuit of higher and higher profit. These recessions have devastating effects on the average person in the form of job loss, reduced wages, loss of access to credit, and savings. However, the small few who are primarily responsible for these reckless and illegal actions face zero consequences. Major American banks played a central role in causing and amplifying the 2008 subprime mortgage crisis, one of the worst financial crises in modern history. They created this crisis through issuing risky loans and sold them to investors. Investment banks like Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, and Citigroup created complex derivatives. These products amplified exposure to bad mortgages across the financial system. Banks borrowed heavily to buy or hold these mortgage securities, magnifying potential losses. The system was not clear, and no one knew who held how much toxic debt, leading to panic and credit freeze. This all led to a massive recession, and those responsible faced zero consequences for devastating millions of lives and the world economy. Instead of helping out those devastated, the Obama administration bailed out the banks and not the everyday people affected by them. Ever since then, it has become normal for the government to unsustainably pump up this private financial sector, which was on full display during 2020. As the world was going through a pandemic, firms like JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, and Morgan Stanley posted record profits, especially in investment banking and trading. And they are investing in many of the same ways that caused the 2008 crisis in the first place. Now, how would nationalizing them help? A national bank, with its motivation being expanded from a boardroom's benefit to literally all of America's, could step in to stop dangerous speculation that leads to these financial crises. Instead of focusing on high-risk, high-reward speculation, nationalized banks could prioritize more stable investments, small businesses, and the average person rather than constantly looking for home runs. They could also use control over banks to fund public good projects such as affordable housing, renewable energy projects, or large-scale infrastructure upgrades, which private banks would not see as profitable enough. Nationalized banks would be subject to greater scrutiny and oversight with an emphasis on transparency. This could help prevent financial practices that benefit the elite at the expense of ordinary citizens. The profits of nationalized banks would go into the public treasury, not to private shareholders. This could provide funding for public programs, infrastructure, and social welfare, reducing inequality in society. There is again real-life proof that this works successfully, with the top 4 of the top 10 biggest banks in the world in measure of assets being public, with the first 4 of the top 10 biggest banks in the world in measure of assets being public, again hailing from China. These banks manage tens of trillions of dollars in assets and are not nearly as subject to the boom and bust cycle as the West is. For example, China was relatively unaffected by the 2008 financial crisis. When financial problems do occur, public-owned banks have much more tools at their disposal to deal with the crisis, especially in ways that prioritize public good. I think that if we succeeded in nationalizing all of these industries and the banks, we would live in a much better society that works for everyone. Once we have the pillars of society that are crucial to everyone's well-being under the control of the people, we can have a strong bedrock to further address all problems in society rather than fighting the constant battle of crawling back basic necessities like healthcare and housing from corporations. If you made it this far, you are clearly captivated, so please consider supporting me on Patreon. And of course, make sure to like, subscribe, and drop a comment. Peace.